Welcome to the Small Giants Fishbowl. This topic is coherent leadership, how your physiological state impacts your ability to lead. A powerful mindset is only one aspect of good leadership. Leaders also need to infuse that mindset into their teams and cultures. Join Tyler Mongan from Heart Lab as we explore human physiology, coherent leadership, and how your physiology impacts your company. Physiology.
A little background on the work I do. My background is both in medicine and also business, and so I like to look at human physiology as kind of the starting point for, whether it be innovation or strategy or leadership. And today we want to look at this concept called coherent leadership. And basically over the past 2 years, I've been traveling around the world and doing workshops, kind of integrating both this human physiology side and the latest science in like neuroscience and heart-brain communication with business innovation and strategy. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the, maybe some case studies and such along the way. But to get started, really, all I want everybody to do real quick is just close their eyes for a second and just check in with their nervous system and just see what's going on with their nerves. And the way you can do that is you can just kind of feel what your body's feeling, or what are you even experiencing outside of your body, wherever you're at, right? And just take a minute, just close your eyes and just kind of check in with your nervous system. Okay, you can open your eyes now and just come back. Basically, maybe some of you had some insights into how your body's feeling. Maybe some of you are hungry or feeling a little tired. Maybe there's some pains in your body you weren't aware of. Maybe there's some sounds going on around you, right, that are stimulating your nervous system. Because your nervous system is constantly looking for information, right, either internally or externally to warn you if there's a need to take action for survival, right? And a lot of times we neglect that simple reality. So we go into a meeting and our nervous system is in a certain state, right? And that state's going to influence kind of the outcomes of that meeting. So for example, when you go to the grocery store and you're really, really hungry, right? Your body's in this state of hunger, the types of things you're going to buy are very different, right? Then if you go to the grocery store when you're very satiated and full, right? You might just grab whatever's on your list and then get out of there, right? But you're not going to grab extra things. When you're hungry though, your body's going to be craving all this stuff. You're going to start buying things you don't even need, right? So really looking at physiological state is kind of a core component of the work I do. And when we talk about this idea of coherence, I think this is a state that is really conducive to leadership, innovation, and high performance. And what I mean by a coherent state is that your body's working together in a way that's very harmonious. It's very efficient and effective. You might think of concepts like synergy and collaboration, but within the body itself. But also we use a term like coherence, for example, in speech, right? So my speech is coherent to you, meaning that you can understand what I'm saying. You can take that information and you can use it for yourself, right? So when the body is in a very coherent state, there's things that are happening that wouldn't happen if we weren't coherent. And they're very subtle things a lot of times. But one of the things we notice when the body jumps into a coherent state is we become very relaxed and we become very focused, okay? And we can see this shift actually physiologically in a couple different ways. One of those is we see a shift in the heart rate variability. And the heart rate variability is actually looking at the space between each heartbeat. So a lot of times when we look at the health of the heart, we might look at how many beats per minute. That's not a really best indicator for health in a sense. it's better to look at how the spacing between the heart is changing over time, right? And when you enter these really coherent states, you start to see these rhythms that are they're very consistent, they're rhythmic, they look nice. So they actually done some studies where they look at the heart and they ask somebody to think about frustration, right? And the feeling of frustration. And when they do that, the heart rate variability becomes very chaotic. If you look at the graph of it, it's like it's all over the place. There's really no rhythm to it. You just look at it, you can tell there's something wrong. When you have somebody think about appreciation, on the other hand, then their heart rate variability goes into a more rhythmic state. They feel comfortable, they feel relaxed, okay? Another indicator of physiological coherence is the brain starts to move into an alpha brainwave state. So there's over 50 brainwave states or more that we're studying now in the body, but the alpha is one, again, where the brain starts to move into a state that's relaxed and focused feeling in the body, right? Now, alpha is a little bit, the interesting thing about alpha is it's very close to, say, a theta state, in that you might feel a little sleepy. And over time, as you learn to develop more of, say, if anybody meditates, can you raise your hand if you do a meditation in the group? Okay. So when you meditate, a lot of times, if you're new to meditation, you might feel sleepy, right, and start to fall asleep. That tends to happen for some people. And that's typically because they're not able to separate their alpha and their theta waves from each other. And so the brain is in a lot of alpha and a lot of theta. You feel sleepy and tired. But when you can start to separate the two, you can actually have more alpha brain waves throughout the brain, and you'll feel very relaxed, but you also feel very focused and engaged, okay? So when we are in this coherent state, in a sense, like being a state of a coherent leader, we say, then our heart rate variability is healthy, our brain waves are more in alpha, we feel calm, we feel focused, right? We feel relaxed. Now, for a lot of us, that's maybe not a typical state, okay, to be in. Maybe a lot of times we're in a more stressful, like high-strung, kind of go kind of energy. And we feel good in that state, right? We feel like we're getting a lot of things done, right? It feels comfortable to us. So as you start to cultivate, say, a more coherent state in the body, it might feel uncomfortable at first. When I did a strategy session with Rolls-Royce, and we had a group of 12 executives, and I started walking them through some of the practices and the framework that I have around innovation, and everybody was playing along really nicely. And what was really cool is when we do that is everybody starts to jump into a coherent state. The hearts and brains start to sync up, and we'll talk a little bit about that, what that means. And there's no competition, there's collaboration, there's a lot of support of each other, and ideas are moving fast, right? And people are having new ideas, they're exchanging ideas, but it feels different because there's not that competition or stress in the room. Now, interestingly, about halfway through the process, one of the guys who was the chief dog, the alpha dog in the room, he was the head boss, and he kind of stopped the process, and he was like, I don't understand where we're going with this, right? And I quickly realized the main thing that had happened was his body started to drop into a very, very coherent state, and that felt uncomfortable to him because he's used to being in charge. He's used to being the boss, right? He's used to his ideas being the best ideas and everybody listening to him. But when you start to drop into a state where everybody's kind of physiologically equal, then everybody's ideas are equal. And also, there's no like leader in the room, right? So his body in physiology felt uncomfortable. And he basically spent an hour saying, to me, he was basically just saying, I'm the best. My idea is the most important. Everybody needs to listen to me, right? And then after he was done, we went back into the process and we got some really good results, right? So keeping in mind that as we talk more about coherence and do some practices, that it might feel uncomfortable at first. And that's part of the process, right? You almost feel like nothing's happening, right? That you're not getting anything done, but a lot of things are happening. So I don't know if anybody has done high performance sports, but I used to be I was in a rowing crew in college. And one of the things I realized is that when everybody is perfectly in sync and rowing together, it feels like you're not doing anything at all. And it's kind of scary because you think you need to do something, right? You think you need to do more or try harder. And if you do, though, you'll mess everything up, right? So it's really interesting when you start to move into these coherent states, especially in groups and teams, is that things start to feel effortless. And they start to feel like you're not doing as much, but you are, okay? Now, actually, let's do a little exercise. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take a second. We're just going to focus on our heartbeat, okay? And we'll talk more about what happens when we do that in a second. So I just want you to close your eyes again. And you can find your heartbeat either by putting your hand on your chest on the left-hand side, or you can just start to feel your pulse in your arm by the thumb side. And all you do is just find your heartbeat and focus on it. Okay, and just find that, and I'll tell you when to stop. Okay, and as you find your heartbeat, also just notice how it grows stronger in the body. And as you focus on the heartbeat, see if you can notice it beating in other places. So you can find that beat in one spot. Can you feel it now in the hands or in the head? Okay, you can open your eyes when you're ready. So just take note now of just how you feel. Okay? If you feel any different, do you feel relaxed, a little more relaxed doing that? Okay? I mean, it was great because it was, you could feel that even though I can't hear you, I could still sense that like everybody got really quiet for a second there, right? And the interesting thing too is that when you're giving your mind that point of focus, like the beat of the heart, it's doing a few things. One is it's bringing awareness to your body. It's giving you a point of focus, and it's connecting to your body more, right? So if you study anything about like flow states, which a lot of people like to talk about nowadays, one of the keys of flow state is like a deep embodiment, right? It's a really deep connection to your body. So it can respond appropriately and rapidly and efficiently and effectively. So doing a heartbeat focused reflection does a few different things. One is they found there's a company called HeartMath, and they've studied the heart for many, many years. And they found out that just by focusing on the heartbeat, you start to increase your cognitive function. You start to become more creative. You have better decision-making capabilities. You have better self-regulation, right? So that simple process, and the more you do that, the easier it becomes. How many of you, can you raise your hands if you couldn't feel your heartbeat or you found it difficult to feel it? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So that just means you just need a little more practice. It's there. It's always beating, which is really, it's really neat because it's one of the few rhythms we have in the body, right? We have our breath as a rhythm in the body. It's one that we have a lot of control over. And, you can change your breathing patterns to change your heart. But what's also interesting, if you just focus on the heartbeat, it will also start to change its rhythms as well, right? Just by focusing on it. And so one of the things I do is I do martial arts training. And in the martial arts, one of the practices we learned is that you actually learn how to beat your heartbeat into your sword. Okay. And one of the reasons why is because when you do that, the sword actually physiologically becomes one with you, right? It's in the same time, same rhythm. It's harder to cut yourself, right? When it when it's you, right? It's harder to do damage to yourself. So as you learn to find your heartbeat, especially throughout your entire body, your body becomes like one thing, right? It's this idea that's in one time, it's in one place. And you'll start to feel it. And again, your physiology will shift as well. And so you start to notice that when I do that, I become more relaxed, right? I become more calm. And then on some level, again, it might feel uncomfortable because you're used to being in a business environment and being stressed and moving fast, right? But when you're in this state, things get done more efficiently and effectively. Now, what's really interesting to me is that the heart and some of the research around it is that it has more influence than just our own physiology, right? So the heart, when we think of the body, we typically think of the brain as kind of the main conductor, right, for our entire physiology. However, research is showing that the heart really is the better conductor of the body, and the brain is kind of more a supportive role, right? So our brain is really responsible for survival is one of the main things, coordinating movements, maybe coordinating memory. But the main role of the brain is survival, right? It spends about 80% of its time and energy on keeping us alive, right? Like when we did that initial check-in with our physiology, your brain saying, is there an animal that's about to attack me? I hear some chickens in the background, but they're not dangerous, so I'm okay. It's also looking at, like, internally, it's saying, like, is my heart beating? Am I breathing? What's my blood pressure like, right? And if any of those things start to become triggers for survival, then your amygdala just takes over, right? And your amygdala is like this fear and kind of fight or flight response, has a function of that in the brain. And once it hijacks the brain, it basically takes over the body, and it starts telling the body to do all these things to prepare to fight or freeze, right? And typically a lot of us are in kind of this low level, kind of hijacked amygdala state, throughout our life. And even at work as well, right? Especially if we're the boss, maybe we're stressed about, profits or revenues, or we're stressed about certain employees. If we're an employee, then we're worried about what the boss thinks about us, how our work is doing, do people like us or not? And these triggers are stimulating that amygdala to kind of take over. We'd say maybe more of a sympathetic state, which is more that fight or flight or freeze state. But really, I think the heart is the conductor of the body, right? And if we put the brain in charge, I think of it like putting the lead violinist of an orchestra in charge, right? So if you think about that for a moment, if you put the lead violinist in charge of the orchestra, what are they going to do? They're basically going to tell everybody else to be quiet. I want to be heard. You're not playing the way I want you to play, so you need to stop, or you need to be quieter, or you need to be louder. But they're going to basically take control, right, around them, and they're going to be the focus. But when the conductor, right, of the orchestra is a third party, right, with the wand, they're making sure everything's in harmony. And somebody might be a little bit too loud, but they know how to adjust that, right? Or somebody might not be playing really well, but they know how to compensate for that, right? So the heart is more of the conductor of the body. And what they're showing is the heart can communicate to the body in several different ways, right? It can communicate, one, through the nervous system, so neurophysiologically. It can also communicate to the brain and the body through biochemically, through hormones. It also communicates biophysically through the pulse, right? Through that pulse of the rhythm of the heartbeat throughout the entire body. And then finally, and I think one of the most interesting ones, is it can connect or it can communicate to the brain and the body electromagnetically through its field, right? So every part of the body that has like electricity running through it is creating electromagnetic fields. And one of the things they found out is that the brain has an electromagnetic field, but the heart's electromagnetic field is 100 times stronger electrically. It's about 5,000 times stronger magnetically, okay? They've been able to measure the electromagnetic field of the heart about 4 to 5 feet outside the body. And they say that as they get better equipment, better technology, they'll be able to measure it like 7 to 10 feet, okay, outside the body. So what's interesting about that is that an electromagnetic field is responding to stimulus and changes, right, from the environment. But also the electromagnetic field is like this field, so it's communicating to every cell in the body instantaneously, right? So for example, if you're using your brain to communicate to your body, it has to do that through the nervous system, right? And that takes time. It's fast, but it still takes time. The electromagnetic field of the heart, when it shifts, every single cell in the body immediately feels that shift, right? So as we start to shift our focus to our heartbeat and cultivate more of that healthy HRV, move the body into a more coherent state, every cell in the body starts to feel that, and it starts to line up with that coherence, right? And they've actually shown, it's really interesting. There's a company in Kansas. They're called Hansa, not Hamsa, but they're called Hansa Medical Clinic, and they've been studying the heart and its application in clinical settings. And one of the things they found out is that, let's say you go to them with a problem. Maybe you've had some illness, chronic illness for a while. They will take your heartbeat and they'll record it, right? Like you would record it for producing an album, a music album. They'll then take that heartbeat and they'll look at it and they'll space it out properly so that the HRV becomes healthy, right? They'll set the rhythm of the heart. Then they'll take that recording and they'll give it to you and you'll listen to it for a few weeks or a month, 2 months. And what they found out is that when they do that, the heart starts to sync with that rhythm that they've created, the person's heartbeat, and the brain then starts to sync with that rhythm as well. And the person starts to get healthier just by listening to a healthy heartbeat, okay? So that's really interesting. Like as the body moves into a coherent state, or the heart moves into a coherent state, the whole body starts to follow, right? Now, as leaders, what's really cool to me is that if you start to cultivate your own like coherence, right, where you start to become more physiologically coherent, you become more calm and relaxed, your brain starts to be more alpha brain waves, you start to influence the people around you, right? So you can have them do the practices as well, but just by you being more coherent, the electromagnetic field of your heart is going to start to influence the workplace, okay? And we kind of know this already naturally, right? You know, we have certain states that we hold physiologically. You might know somebody, maybe an employee even, who they are kind of the depressed person, right? Or they're the kind of angry person in the business, right? Or you might know someone who's the happy person, right? So they have a certain physiological state about them. You might know someone who's just like the calm, relaxed person, right? And I know for myself, what was interesting growing up is that I was put on as a captain of soccer team and the basketball team. I was not the best player, right? So usually you put like the best player as the captain. And I wasn't the best player on the team. I didn't score the most points. And I reflected back on that. I was like, what was I doing where the coach would pick me to be the leader, right? Or even the teammates would pick me to be the leader of the team. And when I reflected back on it, I realized that I was always just calm and I was relaxed. And that's the only thing I did. Like if I did nothing else for the team, I was more calm and more relaxed than everybody else. But when I went in and would talk to other teammates, or when I was there, everybody else would also be more calm and relaxed, right? And the team would perform better because of that, right? And if you look at really high level athletes as well, like I don't know if you follow basketball, like Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan, and you watch them, not only how they play, but also how they handle interviews, right? And just handle themselves in general. It's a very calm, relaxed state, right? And the main reason is because that's where your physiology is performing optimally, okay? You know, I don't know if has anybody ever been to like a Tony Robbins event, conference? No one? Oh, okay. Well, so at Tony Robbins, a lot of times he'll have everybody do this, like a jumping and like yelling kind of experience. He's trying to shift your physiological state, maybe break your state from some old patterns you've had. And then you feel really good, right? You feel like energized. You feel like you can conquer the world. But that state's kind of a false state because you can't stay in that state all the time. You know, you would freak people out. People wouldn't necessarily be comfortable around you if you were always just like, oh, yes, go, you know. So, but if you're really calm and relaxed, you get actually more performance, and you start to influence other people around you in a healthy way, and they feel comfortable around you, right? So, some of the things they found out, like with, at least I found out with the work I'm doing around innovation, is that we want to be, you know, that calm, relaxed state, but also we want to feel like safe around people. And there's a lot of triggers that can happen that don't make us feel safe. For example, somebody with a really deep, loud voice can actually make other people not feel safe. Okay, so that someone who's like very tall and big person can make people feel unsafe, right? So if you walk into a room and you're the leader and you have a really loud voice and everybody is physiology, even if rationally they know that you're a safe person to be around, physiologically, they're going to get triggered to feel unsafe. And they're going to feel like, I need to go into a sympathetic mode. I need to protect myself, okay? So as you develop a more coherent state, you help to balance that out. Like, especially if you're someone who's big and loud, when you're in a physiological coherent state, other people's physiology can then pick up on that, and they can really say, okay, wait, actually we can be calm around this person. Even though there's some social cues that might say this person could be dangerous, I can be calm around them. It's okay, right? So consider that when you're going into a meeting, when you're meeting people for the first time. If you know, there's some techniques that they have people do. For example, if you look at the research around like confidence, right, and you just like put your hands up and hold your hands and stand in front of the mirror, right? Some of you might have seen that, and you do that for 3 to 5 minutes. You start to shift your physiology. Now, in that shift, you increase like your serotonin levels. You might feel more powerful and confident, and that's great. But that can also be a problem because if you're that tall, big person with a loud voice in the room, you don't need that extra confidence, right? Yeah, you don't need to have like this extra big self now. What you need to have more of that physiological coherence, right? So starting to understand how different states in our physiology are going to have huge influences not only on ourselves, but also on the teams and people we interact with, right? And so one of the things I would encourage you to do is to look at ways, one is you start to practice some coherence for yourself. Simple technique is just focusing on the heartbeat. I really like that practice because it's simple. It's not weird. So a lot of times people, when you start to teach them, say, breathing patterns, which also can shift your physiology, people start to say, well, that's weird, right? And especially if I'm working with a group of like executives, I don't want them to feel weird about what we're doing because that will also shift them out of the state I want them in. So when I do work to get them more coherent, I just do heartbeat focus. It's really simple. You can do that for like 3 to 5 minutes as a start. So you can try this before you go into a meeting. You could try this before you're going to meet with a client, meet with your teams. You can also just start your days with that. For me, one of the things I practice is I do it like all the time. So even when I'm talking right now, my brain is constantly shifting and asking myself, can I feel my heartbeat? And by doing that, I'm making sure that my body is physiologically in one time, one place, and it's coherent, right? And it takes some practice, right? It's not something that just happens, but over the past like 3 years of kind of just practicing that, then it's pretty easy to do. And you can feel your heartbeat everywhere because it's in your body, it's beating all the time. And if it stops, then there's a problem, right? So if you can't feel your heartbeat, that's a bad thing. So as you learn to develop and feel that, what's really cool is you'll start to also notice when you shift out of a coherent state, right? Even if your heartbeat is fast, you can still be in a very coherent state. If it's slow, you can be in a coherent state. So it's not about the speed necessarily. It's more about the feeling that you have when you focus on it, okay? Now, does anybody have any questions right now? I've kind of talked a lot about it, a lot of things here. Anybody chime in? Is it all making sense to you guys?
Just
Yeah.
a reminder that if you have questions, you can either submit it through the chat feature, or you can wave real quickly and then we can unmute you. You can also unmute yourself.
Now, the other thing, go ahead. The other thing that's,
Mary,
you have a question? Oh, question?
No? Okay, I don't think so.
Okay. So, another thing just to briefly touch on is that, I'd like to look at how the nervous system develops. I think it's a really good thing for people to understand, because there's a lot of things and a lot of behaviors we have and practices we have that translate into our business, especially if you're a business owner, that could be from your past, right? And so a lot of my work is actually, pulling people out of the past and moving them into the future as well. And I think the coherent state of the body is something that really helps them do that instantaneously. So what's really nice is that you don't have to go back and look at the past and try to fix it, then be in the present, and then start thinking about the future. When you move into a coherent state, you basically automatically start to move into a present, and then you can start thinking about futures from there. But some of the things that that have limited us from the past, and if we look at how our nervous system develops, it's basically from 0 to 7 years old, our body is trying to understand how to survive in the world, right? And we're looking at our parents, people around us. Our mirror neurons are triggered, and we're trying to find practices and habits that they've used to survive that we can then use as well. We don't know if these habits and behaviors are going to really be good for us long term. All we know is they help us survive right now. So for some of us, we might have learned to be very quiet. I was for me, for example, I learned to be very quiet as a child. That helped me survive. I had 7 brothers and sisters. Everybody was really loud. There was a lot of chaos. And if I would get caught up in that chaos, it was very stressful for me. So I would just be calm and quiet, or I'd go to my room, right, and escape. And those were my kind of behaviors that I developed as my survival mechanisms. Somebody else might have developed a mechanism where they're very loud and they scream and they hit people and they get what they want, right? And so from 0 to 7, you're developing this nervous system, but we're not conscious of it. It's rapidly developing, right? It's not something that we have much control over. After 7 years old, between 7 and 9, we start to develop more of the rational mind. We actually start to develop more of the alpha state. Before that, we're more of in a theta and delta state of our brain, which is like a sleep-like state, right? It's like a dream. So anything we see is real to us, or anything we feel is real to us. But then 7 to 9 years old, we start to develop this conscious mind, and we can start to ask ourselves, do I want to, use this habit or not? Is this a good habit for me? Is it helping me in survival or not helping me? However, we've basically anchored a lot of those things that we've developed between 0 and 7 in our nervous system, and we don't know how to change that. And then after 9, between 9 and 35, those next few years, we're really developing our personality of who we are. However, our personality is usually influenced by that 0 to 7-year-old nervous system. And they've actually done some studies. There's a person who does a lot of learning and developmental studies. And they've basically shown that most people are operating at the nervous system level of a 6 to 11-year-old. Okay. And that's where we're deciding what futures we want, which ideas we think are good or not, what we want to do with our life, and also how we think is best for us to survive, our strategies for survival. But between 9 and 35, we're developing our personality. After 35, so is anybody older than 35? I am. Yeah. So after 35 years old, our nervous system starts to anchor itself really deeply in the body. And there's these cells called glial cells that start to wrap around the nerves. And the pathways we formed basically become ingrained in us, right? And it becomes increasingly difficult to change those. But that makes sense because it's very efficient and effective to keep these things that have kept us alive for this long, for 35 years or more, and make them so they won't go away, and make them very fast and efficient, right? So in our bodies right now, there's probably some pathways that we've been practicing and rehearsing since we were just a 0 to 7-year-old child, and they're informing our state, and they're also informing our future, right? So we also do this with our business though, right? So we create these pathways in our business that we think work, and we don't need to change them, and they become deeply ingrained, and we think they're essential to our company and who we are. But we also have to realize they're from the past, right? And what they've shown in some studies is that these are kind of loose estimates, but that we have about 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day. And 90% of those thoughts are the same as the thoughts we had the day before, right? So basically, we are creating the future from the past, right? We only have about 10% of new ideas every day. Now, when you're a baby and you're developing, 90% of the information you have is new. So 90% of the thoughts you have is new. And they've actually done some studies where they've shown that if they put a child who's like 5 years old and they give them a question, 90% of the ideas they come up with are new and novel, right? They just start making stuff up because they don't have reference points. But if you give like a 45-year-old businessman a question, right, and ask him to make up new things, he just basically says, old stuff he said before, right? So we really want to also work on breaking some of these old patterns we've had, okay? And a lot of our patterns too are negative thoughts and also unconscious thoughts. So again, going back to that coherent state, this idea of coherent leadership is as we start to become more coherent with our physiology, we start to become more conscious of what we're thinking, and we start to move into a state where the past doesn't limit us as much, and we can start to have novel ideas. So with the work I do with companies, a lot of times I start to slowly build this state where individuals start to become more coherent, and then as a group and a team, we become more coherent. And then we start to play with different questions, right? We start to ask ourselves about futures or innovations. And what's really neat is they start to get ideas and new ideas they never thought about before, but also ideas that maybe make them feel a little bit uncomfortable as well, right? So when we start to really find like innovative or new ideas that aren't from the past, they might feel uncomfortable at first, right? Because they're things we've never thought about. And initially our brain is going to say, hey, that's a bad idea because it doesn't line up with our past, right? Our brain is designed to recreate the past over and over again, so it's efficient and effective, and it's easy and it's comfortable. And so you have this new novel idea and the brain says that's dangerous, and then you just ignore it basically. But those are really some of the best ideas you can have. So I want to do just a real quick little exercise for you guys on this. It's kind of playing with this idea of coherence and then also thinking about the future. And I want you to, we'll do this. We'll take a second, just write down something that you really want to happen in your business over the next, let's say, month, okay? Or it could be just your life, your personal life as well. Something you want to happen in your life or your business. It can be, the more clarity you have about it, the better, but we're also going to do an exercise around that to help. Okay. Yeah. So I think one of the things, there's quite a few roles that a really good leader needs to take on. One of those is, of course, I think predicting and forecasting the future, right? Where is our business going? Where's the market going? How do we line up with that? And some of the work I do is helping people understand how to take that coherent physiological state and then become coherent with possible futures that they're trying to create or develop or move their teams towards, right? To help them actually, focus the vision of the company. And so does everybody have a goal or some type of future they want to help create in their business? Okay, great. So all I want you to do is I want you to just close your eyes. Yeah. You can see we do a lot of like internal focused awareness work here. And again, just find your heartbeat. So, and keep in mind, as you find your heartbeat, you become more coherent. You move into a more more present space. Your body's in one time, one rhythm. See if you can feel that heartbeat expanding and growing stronger. And then from wherever you're feeling the heartbeat, see if you can feel it move up your neck and into your head. Just like, almost like the feeling of your head was pounding. So your heart and your brain are in one time, one place. And if you can't feel the heartbeat, just imagine what it would feel like if you could feel it. Just make it up. Okay, now as you're feeling your heartbeat, just allow your mind to go into the future where this goal or this thing you want to happen in your business, it's already happened. Okay. And as you let your mind wander into that place where it's already happened, start to notice like what you're wearing, who you're with. Allow your mind to create that image of that experience. How are you standing? How are you talking? What environment are you in? Just start to allow that image to grow clearer. And as the image of that thing already happening, growing clearer, notice how your body feels. Okay, notice how you feel that that thing has already happened. Could be excitement or joy or confidence or. So when you notice that feeling and those feelings, just allow yourself to really feel those in the body, like stimulate the nervous system to have that same feeling. So the feeling that it's already happened, it's already done. And then as you feel that, as you find some of these feelings, ask yourself who the first person is you would tell that this thing's happened, right? And just imagine them in front of you and say, you'll never believe what happened. And just tell them in your own mind, like, what happened, you know, what that goal or that thing was. And tell them as if it's already happened. Okay, then you can keep that feeling in your body. It's already happened. Keep the feeling. Just allow yourself to be in the present. No more imaging. Just feel the feelings. And then you can open your eyes when you're ready. Okay. So for some people, that might have been a little bit challenging. How many people, for people, is that a little bit challenging for you to do that? No? Okay, that's good. So how many of you felt good about that experience? Yeah, did it feel like you're a little bit closer to having that thing happen now? Even in that short little thing we just did, right? Yeah. Okay, a little bit, yeah. So, you know, I mean, so a few things are happening when you do that. One, if you enter a coherent state physiologically, you start thinking about something, you start to become more coherent with that thing happening, okay? As you start to activate some of the feelings around that thing happening, you're telling your physiology that this is going to happen, but even more that it's already happened, right? So there's nothing to worry about, right? You don't need to think about or worry about it not happening. It's already happened. And what's interesting too is that when you start to tell the brain through feeling that something's already happened, then the brain starts to, one is look for it to happen, right? It's like, wow, this thing's already happened. I should just look for it. Because the brain doesn't want you to be a liar, right? It likes to line up with the reality you create in your mind. I mean, for example, if you tell yourself over and over again that you're late, always late for meetings. How many of you are late for meetings? Is anybody a late for meetings person? Yeah. So if you tell yourself I'm always late for meetings, then what happens is you your physiology starts to create that reality. And what I mean by that is that it's not like some magical thing. It just, you'll look for your keys, but you can't see them, even though they're right in front of you. Because your brain will say, look, if we have the keys, we're going to be on time, but we're always late for meetings. So let's not see them right now, right? Or you'll hide your keys and you'll forget where you put them, right? In extreme cases, you might be driving down the road and you're like, wow, I'm going to be early for the meeting. And your brain will say, wait, we're always late for meetings. Let's get into a car accident, right? Could even happen, right? It's like, because the physiology wants to line up with what you're thinking and feeling. So as you start to think or feel into a future outcome that you want, and you do that individually, your physiology is now starting to line up. You become more coherent with that thing happening. What's really cool if you do that with your teams, right? If you get your teams all coherent with a future outcome, you're increasing it logarithmically, right? It's like amplifying that future outcome happening. And so what I mean by that in a tangible way is that, like, a lot of us, we go into meetings, and as a leader, we might start to forecast a certain future we want for our company. And we get everybody's buy-in, but it's a very like brain buy-in. It's a very mental or intellectual buy-in. And that means the brain's in charge in that situation. The brain says, yeah, that's cool. We'll do that. But to be honest, the brain doesn't care what happens like a month from now or a year from now or your 5-year projections. The brain doesn't really care. It cares for that moment where you're like strategizing it and thinking about it because it's interesting and fun for the brain. And it feels good maybe because it's like, oh, wow, my survival is going to be better. But then the brain just forgets about it. It says, that was a cool idea. But what's important is like, am I alive right now? Am I breathing? Is my heart beating? Is my blood pressure okay? That's really all it cares about, right? And the brain can predict futures, but we're talking like 5 to 10 seconds, from when they're going to happen. That's what the brain is really concerned about. Like 5 seconds from now, is like a bear going to run into the room? No. Okay, we're okay, right? So the brain doesn't really care about long term. However, when we start to think about a future and then engage our physiology, starting with the heart, and then also bringing in feeling, then our body starts to really care about that future. And our brain says, wow, we actually do care about this future happening. So it's more likely to start to make it happen or start to look for it to happen. And when you get your whole team doing that and all in alignment with that, things happen really fast. So one of the things I've found in my work is that when I get a team together and we start thinking about innovation, initially I'll hear things like, oh, that'll never happen. Yeah, we have to talk to management and they're such a pain to work with. They don't like new ideas. Oh, we have these processes in place that are stopping us from being innovative. They'll make all these excuses, but by the end of the workshop, they'll be like, we're doing this, and they're going to start tomorrow, right? So a lot of times when we're really coherent with an idea or a future, we're ready to start to take action on it, immediately. There's no lag time because, well, as soon as you give a brain a command, it wants to go do that thing, right? That's like why athletes are really efficient and effective, is because they've basically shortened that gap between their action and reaction time. But for business, a lot of times we've created this huge gap. We'll have these strategic plans or these forecasting, and they'll be 5 years, and we'll start taking action on it in 3 months. And so our brain loses the momentum around it, right? So when we start to get coherent and think about what we want to actually achieve in our company and get our teams involved, these are things that we can start to really take action on immediately, right? And we don't want to, if we have a delay, we're starting to see that there's an incoherence there, right? That it's not quite as coherent as we want it to be. So I want to open up to a few questions here for you guys. We have the last 8 minutes left here. Yeah, Mark, good to see you.
Hi, Tyler. Just thinking about this development. Can you hear me? Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, good. Just working on the development and sharing my sort of objective is always to get everybody within the team working collaboratively from the same page, because I thoroughly believe in synergies and and yeah, you've got Edward the Bono will say that there always has to be a black hat who got to check things over, etc. But working with people, as I do in my position, actually trying to get them to get to that relaxed state, to get to that present. That is the key thing. What I've found, and I mean, this isn't as much a question, it's more of what I tend to do is I tend to work individually with people first off and try and share the vision with people on a one-to-one basis, or pick out maybe one or two people who you think are already sold on the idea. Because when you're working in teams, and you must have found this because you've worked with a lot of people, and I'm just asking, you know, you've had a lot more experiences in different places than I have on this. I'm wondering, you know, is that the norm in that you probably have maybe 30%, 40% who buy into the vision, buy into the future state, and the rest tend to be rather simple.
Yeah. Yeah, so if people aren't familiar with Bonos, he's got the thinking hats, and one of the hats is a black hat, and that's, I guess, the kind of the critical instigator hat or challenger hat. So with the work I do, getting people to that relaxed kind of focused state, it's the key. Like to me, that's the starting point. I mean, when I do the work I do, it's like we start with the body first, because that's the place of innovation. That's the place that's going to create the future that we want to live in or not live in. That's the thing that's performing, right? So if this body isn't like in the state I need to be in to have the best ideas and be most high performing, that's a problem, right? And then I need to get everybody in the group in that state as well, right? And I don't want to tell them I'm getting them into that state necessarily. Like I just kind of hint at saying like, you know, that state's important, but I don't tell them exactly what, you know, how we're going to get there necessarily. We just kind of do these exercises that naturally get them there. And what I've seen is that when everybody gets into that relaxed, focused state, a few things happen. One is there's only collaboration. There's no competition. There's like no black hats in the room. It's really interesting. You'll start to see that there's nobody like saying that's a terrible idea or we can't do that, right? All that language just kind of fades away, and everybody starts moving forward together. The other thing is when I walk them through the process, you know, it's not only the coherence, but also we do a lot of group exercises to build some more external coherence within the group. And we're also thinking about futures. And what I've seen is that you get like really high buy-in, like 80 to 90% buy-in. And that scares people actually. They're more comfortable with like that 30 to 40% because that means they probably don't have to do it, right? But when you actually get to the state where your brain's like, it feels really good about a future and you've actually planned it out and you're coherent in that process, it wants to go do that thing, right? And so what I've found out is like I actually did a session with Rolls-Royce executive team, and then literally within 3 days, they had already proposed some of the innovations we had like strategized on in our session. They had proposed it to the innovation team, and then 6 months later, they had already implemented and dropped $1 million into funding, like the pilot of it. And that was really fast for them. Like they were just like, this has happened faster than we normally work, right? So that's really cool. So you see things happen quicker in that process. And what's interesting too is it's again, it doesn't feel like a lot of work to people. People leave the session, they feel like it was enjoyable, but stuff got done too. Because I've been in a lot of sessions where everybody feels great about a meeting, but then nothing happens, right? So like you know, some of the work is you know on top of the coherence work is also strategy stuff, but it's like getting people to really be coherent with that strategy and ready to move forward immediately. And I do like the idea of talking to people one-on-one as a strategy, especially as a leader. Like if you're in a very coherent state, you're sharing your vision and kind of like getting them to really feel that state. So it's different than buy-in, where they logically agree with you. It's a physiological thing where their body says, you know what, like, yeah, let's do this together. Like they feel like they want to make it happen. Yeah. They don't just think, well, it's going to be good for the company, or yeah, that's going to make more revenue, or yeah, that makes logical sense, right? Because the problem is, like in innovation, is that a lot of companies know they need to be innovative, and they know they need to innovate. Sometimes they even know how exactly they should innovate, but they don't do it, right? And the main reason is because they don't feel like it. They just don't feel like doing it. It makes logical sense. It would work. There's studies that show that it works. It's a good idea, but we don't feel like doing it, so we don't do it. All right, so we got to activate that feeling, but starting with the coherent state of the body.
Okay, well that's it for this one. Check out more Fishbowls exclusively for the Small Giants community at smallgiants.org.